So far we've talked about two things that help us understand how muscles contract in different ways and thus move bones in different ways. So we've talked about how the fascicles are organized, and then we've talked about levers as far as where is the load, where is the applied force, where is the fulcrum. Okay. One other thing we have to talk about is we have to talk about these ideas of origin and insertion. Okay. And throughout here you're given some definition of these, but I'm going to go ahead and list some of them. So if we look at, let me go to full screen here real quick. So if we look at this muscle right here, okay, we're going to notice that it's attached on both ends. So one end attaches up here, and then the other end is going to attach down here. Now when this muscle gets shorter, what happens, and this happens with most muscles, is that one end remains stationary, and then the other end is the one that moves and pulls. And so if you notice, here it is, when this gets shorter, okay, notice that, and let's just look at it this way, when this gets shorter, notice that it's this end that's moving, while this end stays relatively stationary. Okay, so what are the definitions for those terms? Origin is going to be the muscle attachment that doesn't move during a contraction. Okay, it remains stationary. And then we have insertion, which is the muscle attachment that does move during a contraction. Okay, so these are two of our major terms. So every muscle you should be asking yourself, where's the origin, where's the insertion, what's the end that moves, and what is the end that doesn't move. Okay, now what this does is this leads to an action, which is the movement. And the terms we're going to use are terms that you're already familiar with from the joints chapter. So an action could be flexion, extension, hyperextension, abduction. So all of these terms, okay, that you learned previously, all of those are actions. Okay, and so let me turn to the full screen. Okay, and so if we're looking again at this contraction, okay, let's remind ourselves, origin is going to be up here. This is the end that doesn't move during that contraction. Down here is going to be the insertion. This is the end that does move during a contraction. And what's the action that just happened? We just flexed the elbow joint. Okay, so origin, insertion, action. Now, if we are thinking about, okay, so origin, insertion, action, so there's the origin of that muscle I was just showing you right up here. Down here is the end that moves, that's the insertion, and so the action is when you actually get flexion. Now, what I also want to do is note that you are going to have a number of different muscles at this joint. It's not just one. Now, one of these muscles is generally considered what's called the prime mover or the agonist. That means it is the muscle that is primarily responsible for that action. So here we're looking at elbow flexion, and the muscle that is most responsible for flexing this joint is this muscle right here. But it can have a little help. There's other muscles such as this one that when it contracts, it helps that flexion happen. On its own, it's not going to be able to flex it very well, but it can help. And so a muscle that helps the agonist is called the synergist. Okay, now let's look at this. If this muscle gets shorter, the bone moves up. We get flexion. But let's instead look at this muscle on the back side of the arm. Okay? So this is on the anterior side. Okay? Anterior side. And this muscle back here is on the posterior side, so back here. Okay? So if you think about it, the way this muscle is attached, it's attached to the same bone but on the opposite side. So if it gets shorter, it does the opposite motion. It will extend. And so it is called the antagonist. Okay? Now, this is the prime mover for elbow flexion. This muscle back here is the antagonist for elbow flexion. But let's instead talk about elbow extension. Remember, elbow extension is going to be straightening out that arm. So this muscle back here would be the prime mover, the agonist for elbow extension. Notice the name gets flipped depending on the action. And if we're talking about elbow extension, this one is the antagonist. It opposes that. So these terms are always going to be relative to the action. What action is happening? And therefore, what muscles help that action happen? What muscles oppose that action happening? Okay? And so in your notes packets, given what we've talked about, I'd like for you to look at these terms and write in your own words, what do these terms mean? And then if you go back to your homework activity, there's a couple of different activities here that will help you make sure you understand these concepts.